Lights, camera, action. It's that glorious time of year where you can, yes, plan your whole week around movies. The 28th Wisconsin Film Festival runs April 9th through 16th with over 135 films to choose from. Documentaries, American indies, world cinema, and so much more. All on the big screen right here in Madison. Popular screenings are already selling out, so don't wait. Start planning today at wifilmfest.org.
Is there a science that explains God? What if the next great paradigm shift isn't about matter, but about spirit? A free lecture titled The Science of God and Its Power to Heal Us explores these questions. Speaker Nikki O'Hagan will travel from Ireland to Madison to share this talk on Thursday, March 19th at 6 p.m. at First Church of Christ Scientist on Seago Road. All are welcome. Visit ChristianScienceMadison.com for details.
This is CityCast Madison. I'm Bianca Martin, and here's what Madison's talking about. Today, did you know the Madison Symphony Orchestra is celebrating its 100th season and bidding farewell to its longtime maestro? John DeMain has led the orchestra for more than 3 decades, and now he has a new memoir titled Working with My Heroes out today. In honor of his book release, we're revisiting my conversation with him, where he details the highs and lows of building the Madison Symphony Orchestra into the powerhouse we know today. John, welcome to CityCast Madison.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
This is a moment where folks are really giving you your flowers for the many years of service to our community and to the art scene here in Madison. You've been the music director at MSO for more than 30 years. You serve as the principal conductor for the Madison Opera. How does it feel to be at this stage on your final season?
Well, I feel the warmth of the audience. I'm coming back next year as a guest. I will no longer, have the duties of a music director, but I'm going to do quite a few concerts next year because the new music director designate will be chosen too late to plan next year. So we're already planning next season because we want to get our brochure out in March, and we're not going to name a music director until late May or early June if we're fortunate enough to, come to an agreement and all of that kind of stuff and a contract. And so what we're going to try to do is hold open some concerts for them to come and be introduced as music director designate. And of course, they will plan 27, 28. But I'm going to be around to help out, which is fine. I'm going to continue with the opera for a while longer, because I'm just serving as a principal conductor. I won't do everything, and I hope to come back and do things from time to time with the symphony. But it's very exciting. There was one point where when we were playing the Mahler Resurrection, the orchestra played something so beautifully, and I said, this is what's going to make it hard for me to retire, is to just hear you play so beautifully and be right in the middle of it. I got the best seat in the house, right? So
That's true. Yes. Well, I'm sure that's welcome news to folks that you're leaving officially, but you're still going to be around, and the show must go on.
The show must
right?
go on.
It's really moving and exciting to have someone who's so passionate about the work and to know it so thoroughly. So it's exciting that you're in the community here. And we're big fans on CityCast Madison. And not only are we fans, but y'all are also regular advertisers for our show. So have to say that transparently. That said, this show, as all of our shows are, is produced with 100% editorial independence. Now that I've said that, let's talk about some history, shall we? Because 100 years is pretty spectacular. The Madison Symphony Orchestra started in 1925 as a small ensemble and is now a full-size professional orchestra. What are some of the standout moments, would you say, in the orchestra's history and its evolution?
Well, there's only been 4 music directors. I'm the 4th. So each one of us have had very long tenures. And the first conductor, that orchestra was largely a community orchestra of amateurs. I'm sure there were many fine players, but they were not paid. And actually, from what I've been reading and learning about, I think that they were very careful in what they were doing when they first started out.
What do you mean by that?
They sounded like a community orchestra. They did not sound like a professional orchestra,
Like a little tepid.
Yeah, and not playing the most difficult repertoire, making sure that everybody could play it. And then over the years it developed, but it was my predecessor, Roland Johnson, back in the 1960s, who started paying the musicians. And so he created this regional orchestra that was now a professional orchestra. And I always like to explain to people that, if you're in a big city like Milwaukee, you have a full-time orchestra where it's, they're on a weekly contract with paid vacations and, retirement benefits, insurance, all of that. We're a part-time orchestra in that our musicians are paid every time they rehearse and play, but it's a part-time job. But we play a lot and our players are well paid, but that's the difference. So what my predecessor did was he took the heads of the department of the University of Wisconsin. So like the oboe teacher, the trumpet player, whatever, and they didn't even have to audition. He just made them the principals of the orchestra. That would never fly today. But on the other hand, the university always hired really fantastic people for their departments. So they were really fine players.
A pretty smart move for what it's worth.
Right. Because the resource of the city would not have supplied that kind of player, automatically. So that gave them something to work with. But then filling out the sections, I mean, to have a string, a symphony orchestra has 60 string players. To find 60 string players in the area who play at the level that you want them to play, that took some doing. But anyway, Rollins started that. He founded the opera company. He trained the chorus. He did everything. And he was there about 35 years, I think. And so then I replaced him. And he said to me, double size of the audience and make it better. And we did not have a full-size string section. And the depth in the section, you know what I mean, as you get back in the section, some of the playing, like the second violins, were hopeless. I mean, there was a couple good players, but
they're there to fill some of the space.
fill some of the space, right. And then I introduced, when I got here, blind auditions. Because basically what was happening is that, each one of these players from the university, like say you were the principal trumpet and you needed a third or fourth trumpet, they would choose which student played the best and they let them play in that concert. But that's like a closed shop. And I come from a world, where I work with unions all the time and we have blind auditions. And so I blew that all apart, started blind auditions, and people started coming in from outlying areas. And also I raised the bar, and I said, we're going to play really hard music. We're going to do all the Mahler symphonies. And I remember at the end of my first season, a number of players said, well, we see what you're doing and it's really exciting, but I don't want to work that hard, so I'm going to resign. Well, fine. That was a good choice on your part. And then people started coming in from outlying areas, from Chicago and from Milwaukee and all of that. And then and they'll drive, to come to the rehearsals or find someone to stay with for the week, because they have to come for a week. And also before I started, they would rehearse for a concert over 2 weeks, like Monday, Wednesday, dress rehearsal Friday, play one concert on Saturday. But I had a career on the outside and I couldn't give those 2 weeks and I couldn't train the chorus. So I brought in a choral director for the chorus. And I made all the rehearsals the week of the concert. So Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, dress rehearsal. Well, then it was just Saturday, and then I added Sunday. So when I started, it was only Saturday night. And I said, we want to double the size of the audience. Let's do a Sunday matinee, that people can go home in the daylight in the wintertime. It's a great time to go hear something because it's the last thing you do before you get ready for your next week of work. So I introduced that. The first year we did 2, second year 4, third year 6. And then by the 4th year, we had the whole season doubled on Sunday. And then
wow.
So we confined it all to that 1 week. Then we added a third performance when we built Overture Hall because we marketed and we found that there would be an audience for that. We had huge audiences when we first built the hall, 5,200, 5,400 for a weekend. But that's because when when the hall was open, everybody wanted to come and all of that. That fell down a little bit after a while because everybody couldn't go to everything. So we still have the 3 performances, but the attendance is a little less than that used to be back then.
We've got to talk about the space y'all perform in. And before we do, I want to point out that it is a bit of a blustery morning. And so folks might actually be hearing wind chimes, which is adding some magic to this musical conversation and, some physical representation that music is all around you, John. So can we talk about that space a little bit? Because I've heard that Overture Hall is one of the finest halls acoustically in the country. And as you mentioned, it wasn't even there when you first started. And it sounds like it probably had a big impact on what it affords y'all to be able to do. And I'm curious what makes the hall so special and, how it's been a game changer for the orchestra.
So Michael Alston's book has just come out, The History of the Madison Symphony. It's a really in-depth thing, and you'll learn, where they were performing in MATC at the time, in their auditorium. That auditorium doesn't exist anymore, the one that they were performing in.
Wow.
And they were performing in the Stock Pavilion. There's great stories about the Chicago Symphony playing in the Stock Pavilion, and you could smell the manure and all of that, But it was one of the great acoustics in the city at the time. But the orchestra did not have a first-class hall to play in. And so they decided to renovate the Capitol Theater. Back in the 1980s, I think it was the mid-80s, they opened it up as the Civic Center, Madison Civic Center, and they started performing, bringing the Broadway shows there and the symphony playing there. But it was a very inferior space. It was nice because everybody had a home, but the problem with the space was that there were 900 people sitting underneath a low-ceiling balcony, and that balcony cut off the overtones of the instrument. And if you were to buy a ticket and sit underneath there, I always joke it sounded like the Salvation Army on a bad night, but I mean, it was not very nice because But the sound was so foul. And then if you went upstairs to the mezzanine, it sounded like Carnegie Hall.
Wow, such a different experience.
We went across the street and looked at the Orpheum. We thought maybe about buying the Orpheum, but they have the same problem. They've got all those people sitting underneath this low-ceiling balcony. So right around that time, Pleasant Rowland, who had already been donating to the arts. I mean, she loved the arts and she loved helping out, and she created the Concerts on the Square. I mean, she gave them money, the chamber orchestra, to start the Concerts on the Square. So she was a real arts patron. And when she knew that she was going to sell the American Girl doll, she knew that people would come at her for donations. And so she jumped it and she said, rather than having it be a splinter effect where everybody's coming at her, all these different arts organizations, she challenged all the professional arts organizations in the city to get together and dream. What would you like? Well, the symphony, of course, would have liked to have a dedicated concert hall, but we wouldn't have enough performances to occupy that. So we went to the University of Wisconsin, but the University of Wisconsin did not think they could attract 2,000 people to, a symphony concert. They were playing in Mills, and, if they had 500 people, it looked like a sellout. So they weren't a partner. So our partners had to be the same ones that always were, the opera and Broadway. So then what came out of it was the decision to build a new arts center that would have several halls. So they reconfigured the Capitol Theater, built Overture Center for the Arts, of course, big addition to the Museum of Modern Art, and redid the Playhouse and added Promenade Hall. So this was incredible. And I was working out in California at Opera Pacific Symphony, and they were planning on building a hall. And they were hiring Cesar Pelli to be the architect. And he happened to say that he never put a brick into a wall without consulting with an acoustician. And I knew he was on Pleasant's shortlist. So when I got back to Madison, I said, I just met Cesar Pelli and I just heard of his passion and dedication to music and how important it was to him. And I said, I hope you'll give him serious consideration. Well, she ended up hiring him as the architect, and that started it. And we hired Kierkegaard was our acousticians. And so there were two major acousticians, but one company dealt with dedicated halls. So a dedicated concert hall would mean you can't flip it into a theater. It would mean that the shell is permanent. And so you can only do concerts.
It's a very specific space.
Very specific space. We have a multi-purpose space. So we can fly the ceiling into the roof, and we can recede on these giant railroad wheels. We can recede the shell into the back, close it off.
You're talking about the wonderful organ?
Yeah, that. Well, then also, Pelli wanted us to look at some of the halls that he had designed around the country, and Pleasant also wanted us to see various performing arts centers to decide the quality of the building, And so she came out to where I was working, which was at Opera Pacific. That was a very high-end hall with beautiful trimmings and all of that. And Pleasant said, I want that. And then we went to North Carolina, where Pelli had designed a hall that he thought we would like the shape of that hall. And we walked in there, And it was a multi-purpose hall, but it wasn't in theater and opera setting. It was in symphony setting. And their back wall had organ pipes on it. And I turned to Pleasant and I said, "Oh my God, if we had an organ," I said, "it would just be like a European concert hall. It'd be so incredible." But how do you do that when you're multi-purpose? You know what I mean? When you're going to have the organ there, but it can't be there all the time. Well, it is there all the time, but it comes forward and goes backward, and the instrument moves around. What was funny at the time was the people that were taking us through from the Arts Center in North Carolina said, "Yeah, we hope to have an organ, but we ran out of money, so those pipes are all faux,
Oh my
so it's just
gosh.
for look. But ours are not faux. Ours work."
I do want to get a chance. So we've talked about some of the history to talk about this season, right? Like, how did you pick music for this special season and what informed your decision making?
Well, I mean, I wanted to have artists that I had worked with over the years. And of course, I couldn't always have them on my concerts because there were guest engagements. But the other person that I just adore and have loved having over the years was Emmanuel Axe. So Manny's going to be with me in March, and I'm really happy about that. And then Manny Axe is going to play the great big C major piano concerto. And then again, I like, so there's a woman, Gabriela Ortiz, who's very hot right now. She's Mexican composer, and Gustavo Dudamel has been championing her and her work. And I happened to be watching a Berlin Philharmonic performance, and this piece, Teaneck, was by her, and I was blown away by it. And I thought, I've got to do that in Madison. I mean, it's a fabulous, big orchestra piece that is really fun to listen to, and she's really great composer. And so, and I'm also very dedicated to equity, diversity, and inclusion. We're looking at women as conductors. We're looking at people of color. There's some great women composers out there, great African American composers, Hispanic composers, and that's got to be part of the mix. I mean, that's the future, and that's very much, part of my mantra. And then my final concert as music director. That program has Gershwin's American in Paris. It has four movements from Holst to the Planets. It has the last movement of the Beethoven Ninth Symphony. So those are like the core popular pieces in the symphonic world. And I thought that they should be, on this. It's a celebration, but I made sure like each one of the candidates for my successor, they're all playing new pieces. The contemporary symphonic music today has gotten very accessible, very hot, really fun. Jazz and rock has come subtly into the influence of concert music, and so that permeates the whole season. So we're looking at the past and looking at the future at the same time. That's the concept of our celebration.
I want to spend a beat on your career, John. You're a Grammy and Tony Award winner. You received the National Opera Association's Lifetime Achievement Award, traveled all over the world to conduct orchestras and operas. Madison is so lucky to have had you in the ranks for these last 32 years. Listening to you, you're so passionate. You're hilarious. Your descriptions are incredible. Like, I could listen to you all day. I'm like, want to write down all of these adjectives. Like, truly inspired. And I, want to ask, as you're thinking about passing the baton, like, what do you want your successor to know? And what makes a great maestro?
Oh,
They got big shoes to fill. That's what I'm feeling like.
well, March 17th, my book comes out. So you can, working with my heroes, so you get a big insight into sort of my approach to music making. I mean, first of all, the leadership qualities are sort of innate, right? I mean, you've got to not be afraid to stand up in that group of musicians, many who can play rings around you, their instruments. I mean, it's like you're looking at a sea of doctoral candidates, because they're all so accomplished.
That's got to feel incredible.
But the way the game works is that, you can't have 60 opinions or 90 opinions of how a certain phrase should go. So you have to hire someone to make those decisions for you. So even if you disagree, it's too bad. You got to play it my way, because otherwise you'll kill each other. I mean, that's the way the game plays.
Too many cooks in the kitchen.
I mean, I think it's important in today's day and age. I mean, in America, the conductor has to be willing to not only work with the orchestra and try to have the highest standards, but it has to be able to go out in the community, work with the community, be willing to help with fundraising. You can't just live in an ivory tower. And I'm so proud of my organization because we do a lot of socializing with our donors and with our public, so that our public, and that big lobby at Overture Hall is just great for conviviality and for people to have conversation. I see people hanging out in the lobbies after the concert, and talking to each other. And so there's that whole inner working. I think that, in the old days, conductors were often tyrants, and they were, not respectful of the musicians. You can't do that. I mean, you just can't do that. I mean, and besides, anybody who's really smart knows that if you conduct rehearsals with love, they're going to play better. And so my rehearsals, it's always please and thank you. You conduct in an atmosphere of respect, and you don't play favorites. They sense that I respect them, and they see my passion, and so they play their hearts out. And whether those people like me or don't like me, it's sort of irrelevant. You know what I mean? You can't please everybody, and an orchestral musician's point of view is very myopic. I mean, they look at their part and their relationship to you. They don't see the whole. Usually, when an orchestral player becomes a conductor, they go, "Oh my God, you should see what different perspective we have when we're sitting out there, and and then when we're standing up here, it's a whole different feeling." But what I'm all about is trying to find an exciting way to do what the composer said. So there are conductors out there, especially conductors who are composers, who sometimes think they can make it better by sort of like recomposing the piece or distorting what the composer asks, and that's just not me. And so when I'm doing my listening, I look for a conductor who actually does what I'm looking at. When I'm looking at the score, he's actually, doing that. And that will inspire me and say, yes. But, if you're going to play new music and you're going to make new sounds and different kinds of things, I learned that the conductor is the cheerleader there, and if you're enthusiastic about it, your players are enthusiastic about it. And if you're not, then you're in trouble. And so, but I think that, I've worked with some tough orchestras. When I was with Houston Grand Opera and the Houston Symphony was in the pit, they're a bunch of, divos and divas, because they're a major orchestra. They play on the stage. They like playing opera, but they don't particularly like going into the pit. And so learning how to work with an orchestra like that taught me a lot because, and especially when I was young, I remember one of my first concerts ever, it was with the Pittsburgh Symphony, and I was starting out as a conductor, and I was only like 30 years old, and I was playing this Mozart symphony, and I don't know, they had been on the road with this conductor who had just conducted it so slowly and so un-Mozartian, and I remember I got to the last movement, and I was doing a nice, chipper tempo, a nice allegro. It was Mozart 29, and da-dee dum 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 da-dee dum, and the principal bass player, it's too fast, Sonny. so they always loved, the players always loved to give young conductors a really hard time, and so they looked at me and what I was going to say, and I said, sir, I know you've been playing this slower, but I said, I'm not the only conductor who does it at this tempo. Besides, that's the tempo we're going to do it. And they did it. And the critic called me the next day at the motel or hotel and said, "You're the first person to get this orchestra to play Mozart in 6 years." That's sort of what launched my career.
Wow.
But they were giving me the business, and they do that to young conductors. So I had to. But you never know. You never know what the situation is, what the personal situation of the player is sitting out there. When I was, all those years I was in Houston and I was working with the Houston Symphony, there was a second oboist who was so disruptive during the rehearsals, and he was nasty to the conductor and loud and with his interjections and foul language and everything, Turns out he hated his job. And he quit playing the oboe and became a chef and became very happy. But, You don't know that. You don't know what these players' issues are. I mean, I'm with the St. Paul Chamber Orchestra. The husband and wife sat together in the principal's second violin chair. Well, if they just had a fight over breakfast and they're sitting there pouting and you think it's something you said and it isn't, it's something they said to each other. So I mean, how could you know that? So you just have to develop. I always say, don't listen to what they say. Listen to how they play. Do not compromise. Get what you want, but always as a gentleman. And so that set the stage for me into how I would conduct myself. But we pride ourselves that we have a really safe working environment, both at the symphony and the opera. And what that does is when these guest singers come in, like for the opera, that they're so loving and they feel so free to express themselves and we hug and because there's no agenda there. It's about the work. It's just about the work. We're all there to do the work and we want to have a wonderful time doing it because music is so fabulous. And why should it be an oppressive, unhappy situation? It should be, my thing is after you play that Mahler symphony, which lasts close to 90 minutes Saturday night, I want you to go home. You might be exhausted, but I want you to go home and feel like you did something. You contributed something, and I don't squelch the players. I let them play because that's, so then, and I mean, we rehearse in the warmest, most positive atmosphere. When I put the baton down, nobody talks. They listen. They will say, occasionally they laugh at my jokes, and that's a sign that they're with you. If they're laughing at your jokes. So that there's a lot of psychology in that. In getting people to want to play for you, and I think it's how you treat them.
John, I really love what you said earlier, which was like you are conducting with love. That's the standard. And that people are receiving that and understand that and they respect you and you're getting the best out of the players because it is that place of love. You can have your high expectations and not wanting to compromise, but that doesn't mean you treat the orchestra in any kind of negative way. And so like leading with love, I think that's such a beautiful message to give and what a journey you've had. This is an awe-inspiring conversation and I wish that I was in your orchestra so I could have learned from you / I want to be your friend. I'm sure everyone listening feels that way, but just absolutely, really, this has been a gorgeous conversation and what a gift to Madison you've been. And thank you for all of your service. And yeah, I can't wait to go to a show.
Well, thank you for having me.
That's John DeMain, music director for the Madison Symphony Orchestra. That's all for today here on CityCast Madison. I'm your host, Bianca Martin. Don't forget, you can support the show and get great perks by becoming a CityCast Madison neighbor at membership.citycast.fm. And if you enjoyed today's show, why not share this episode with Timothée Chalamet? If you want to hear more from John, he'll be talking about his new book with Gail Warland March 24th at Central Library thanks to the Wisconsin Book Festival. All right, we'll be back tomorrow morning with more stories from around the city. Until then, take good care.